with that, I think the first presenter is Rich Weber. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sean. The topic of this webinar is spatial tools. You'll note that the title is Concepts for Eco-Hydrology. That's not a mistake. We're going to use the eco-hydrology as a framework for the rest of the webinar. Just a quick shot of the outline for the webinar today. I'm going to start and talk about what eco-hydrology is, what the concepts are, how to relate those to landscapes, talk about stuff that we do have in our toolbox now, and how to use those available tools to develop ecological sites. And then Dwayne's going to take over and show you some interesting applications using GIS platform to essentially build sites spatially and how to aggregate different landscape elements to make ecological sites. What is eco-hydrology? A lot of definitions out there. It's used to be an emerging term. It's not anymore, but to save confusion, I'm just going to ask everybody to accept these premises. First of all, water moves through all landscapes. It actually moves into, through, and out of all landscapes, depending on how we define those landscapes. The movement of that water influences the formation of soils and the maintenance of the functions of those individual soils. And the interaction between soil and water largely drives ecological processes. Tools out there. Simulation models run the gamut and are growing, including the emerging technology in the rangeland hydrology and erosion model. Some of you might be familiar with the soil plant atmosphere or water or SPA model. People used to working with drainage and drainage lateral effects, used to drain mod and lateral effects models. These models basically all move water through soil in a landscape context. Classification systems, we have listed 3 here, and I'm going to attempt to take the hydrogeomorphic classification system, ecological site descriptions, and technology in the soil survey division with hydro sequences and soil systems and wrap them all up into one overlapping system. They really are the same thing. We need to start thinking in terms of HGM, ESDs, and hydro sequences as a seamless construct. Classification and assessment systems for landscapes also run the gamut. The folks in the West that are used to the proper functioning condition assessment system in rangeland might be familiar with that. Stream Visual Assessment Protocol is also an assessment system for riverine or stream landscapes. The Roskin classification system is an attempt to make sense out of individual landforms that express themselves as active stream channels. These are all available information and assessment tools to use when we're building and assessing ecological sites. And when Dwayne gets into geospatial techniques, we're going to start talking about data, the management of that data, how to essentially use spatial data to build sites and do all the things that we can do with spatial information. It's going to talk quite a bit about terrain derivatives, including hill shade wetness index and a whole host of other things, including remotely sensed data. And data sources, obviously a very important consideration. We do have, fortunately, a large amount of data sources in various packages. One thing I want to talk about, first of all, is the major land resource area. Most of you are used to considering that as a primary data source because that's our framework for building associations of like soils and also an association of like landscapes. Within that large MLRA boundary, there are multiple ways of breaking that system up, and the next bullet asks you to consider that watersheds exist within MLRAs. And we have readily available definitions of watershed based on HUC boundaries ranging from, well, any scale we want to. The National Hydrology Database, including pre-built stream data, and then of course the extremely valuable and large data set available in our Soil Survey Geographic database, which includes spatial information as well as a very large amount of soil attributes that we we'll talk about using to build ecological sites, mappable ecological sites with those attributes. We're also going to talk about, when Dwayne gets into the tools, the use of national elevation data in multiple resolutions from 30 meter and 10 meter down to readily available 3 meter data and even other finer data sources if we have those available. Also land cover data, the national crop data layer, and multiple other sources. The hydrogeomorphic classification system. We're going to move into a discussion of what it is and what it means in terms of eco-hydrology. This system was originally developed back in the 90s for the functional assessment for wetlands by Dr. Brinson and his colleague. And it starts with 7 broad wetland classes, which in theory, all wetland landscapes on Earth will fit into one of these 7 broad classes. HGM requires the determination of a reference domain where a certain subclass exists. And so we've got an immediate correlation with ecological sites and that major land resource area boundary. That can serve as a default first cut for a HGM reference domain. So we've got a nice correlation there. And ultimately, the HGM landscape definition and ecological sites devolve down into decisions of lumping and splitting based on the needs of the developer. But at its heart, the HGM system is based on 3 broad parameters, beginning with landscape position, in other words, where it is on the landscape, and actually where it is within a watershed. We can build watersheds out of landscape positions. Dominant water source. That, in this context, is not the only water source for an individual landscape, but it's the water source that tends to dominate the function. Obviously, all landscapes receive rainfall, but not all landscapes receive groundwater. Not all landscapes receive floodwater. Not all landscapes receive tidal water. And so those become a dominant functional water source that separates out landscapes. And finally, hydrodynamics is a fancy word that merely describes the directions of water movement in and out of individual landscapes in vector format. So essentially, water budget arrows with magnitude and direction, and that's what hydrodynamics means. So again, landscape position, dominant water source, and hydrodynamics, these are our 3 broad parameters for the HGM classification system. And here is the list of the 7 broad HGM classes, starting with riverine, slope, the mineral and organic flats, the fringe wetlands, depending on whether they're a large lakeshore or ocean coast. That's where the fringe landscapes exist. And finally, singled out by itself are depressional landscapes. So let's start with riverine. Riverine landscapes exist in floodplains, and we're talking about true floodplains with a defined active stream channel and an associated floodplain that was formed and maintained by the flow energy associated with that channel, and also the sediment elements and compounds that are a raw material for those landforms to be developed and maintained. The dominant water source is driven by the stream hydrograph. And this hydrograph influences not only surface inundation, but also groundwater fluctuations, depending on whether we're in a heavily groundwater influenced floodplain or not. And the hydrodynamics for riverine wetlands are horizontal and bidirectional as water moves between that active channel and that associated floodplain and back and forth. So it's a bidirectional movement that's unique to riverine landscape positions. In almost all cases, when we look at map units within a riverine wetland landscape, the geomorphic attribute in the SERGO database will include the term floodplain. This is a nice, convenient attribute to have, and that geomorphic description is almost always 100% for that particular landform. So the good news is we can do a broad riverine landscape definition in many cases with the geomorphic description alone. Hydrographs. When we talk about the stream hydrograph, we've got a nice repeatable hydrograph taken from the Tongue River near Dayton, Wyoming. This is a snowmelt-driven hydrograph, and we see the shape and size is largely the same across 2 years, pretty common to snowmelt-driven hydrographs. But The illustration we have here shows an arrow at a flow of 100 cubic feet per second in this case. So if we know that we tend to start getting wetland hydrology occurrence at that flow rate, the distance in time between the rising and falling limbs as it crosses that 100 CFS line defines our hydro period for that particular type of wetland. This hydrograph will influence surface inundation described as flooding in our Web Soil Survey water features report, also ponding, residual ponding after the stream hydrograph recedes, and also groundwater. So the frequency and duration by month of flooding, ponding, and groundwater have specific context within this riverine landscape. Just a nice picture borrowed from the photo gallery from Western Tennessee. This is a stream in active flood stage. This is inundation that's associated with dynamic flooding. Some people might be familiar with the use of the term lotic. Lotic is moving water, that's dynamic flood water, and this water will go away when the hydrograph recedes. After the hydrograph recedes in a typical floodplain, we may or may not have areas that have residual ponding left behind. This particular case from the southeastern U.S. is a ponded area with a associated soil map unit, and this soil map unit has a ponding interpretation associated with it that's distinct from the flooding interpretation on that same map unit. And in this particular case, this is at an episaturated condition. So this water is parked on top of a fairly low saturated hydraulic conductivity soil that will maintain that ponded. And so it's got a really distinct hydrology, landform, and associated plant community if this site was outside of crop production. But a good candidate for a distinct ecological site based on landform and hydrology. This shot shows a different, very different type of floodplain. This is back to that Tongue River, Wyoming site, not too far from the stream gauge. We've got water expressed on the surface in this macro topographic feature in the floodplain, and this is not flood water. This is not ponded water. This is groundwater, and this groundwater is in direct connection with the stream water surface profile in the background. So as that water surface profile moves up and down with the hydrograph, that groundwater table will move up and down fairly rapidly. And this is very common in floodplains we can consider to be endosaturated, and we would should look for groundwater interpretations in terms of frequency and duration by month and depth for this particular map unit. Nice shot borrowed from my colleagues in the Corps of Engineers in their functional assessment guidebook for riverine wetlands in the Northern Rocky Mountains. I'd like to use this slide just to illustrate distinct landforms within a floodplain in terms of landscape soils and hydrology. So starting with the foreground, that's an obvious upland, steep interface between the upland and the adjoining floodplain. Growing lodgepole pines, not hydrophytes, obviously don't like wet conditions. Then we move into, in the foreground, a geomorphic back swamp position. And this back swamp obviously has a fairly large amount of groundwater moving down valley, separate from the stream channel, which the beaver are taking advantage of to dam up and make beaver ponds out of that system. As we move across towards closer to the stream channel, we immediately adjacent to the channel, we've got another landform with lodgepole pines growing on it again. So we've apparently lost our wetness, and this landscape position is a natural levee, and it's drier than the back swamp for three separate reasons. One of which is it's higher in elevation. It's a depositional area where the stream has dropped out coarse-grained sediment before it moves into the back swamp. Secondly, groundwater table in this area is being drawn down by the lateral effect of the associated channel in the same way a drainage ditch drains a wetland. And thirdly, the soil is much more coarse textured. It dropped out immediately adjacent to the channel, and so the finer grain material is left behind to move into the back swamp. So three distinct landforms, three distinct hydrologic conditions. And finally, we move into the active channel, which is a relatively small portion of the entire landscape position, and I would submit it's got no more than that aerial extent complement of functions. Across the channel is a bar, a nice channel bar formation, which we can consider to be a distinct landform and probably a distinct ecological site. And then moving past that bar, we get into the adjoining uplands again. So the system boundary for the entire riverine system is bounded by the foreground and background lodgepole pine community. And within that system, we probably have got a candidate for 3 separate ecological sites within that riverine system. This is a map from Livingston County, Missouri, and this is a simple extent map for all soil map units dissolved that contain the floodplain geomorphic description. We can say it's a fairly large extent in this particular county, and we can also expect that within that large landform, we've got at least 2 or 3 separate distinct landforms that are large enough spatially to define as separate ecological sites. Cross-section of a nice floodplain with nice, well-delineated, separate landforms separated by elevation and position from the floodplain. Each of those landforms also has got a distinct plant community, and it's also associated with distinct soil map units. So in this particular case, we've got a nice set of data to make rational distinctions for separate ecological sites that, again, separate themselves by landscape position, hydrology, and dominant water source. And at some point across that floodplain, as we move higher and higher, we're going to move out of that hydrograph stream dominant water source and into a runoff or even into an upland site. So we've got possibly one complex site or several simple sites, again, depending on the spatial resolution that we have to all live with in terms of soil map units, and also exactly what the goals of the end user for the ecological site description are. Okay, moving out of riverine, and in this case we're moving up into the headwaters of any individual watershed. These are low-order stream reaches. I don't like to use the term stream anymore. I prefer to use the term watercourse. And if so the dominant water source is no longer stream hydrograph because we simply don't have the flow accumulation and the stream energy to make a hydrograph pulse. We obviously can get surface runoff into these because of the flow concentration we find in stream headwaters. And if we have a groundwater source that's strong enough to provide surface saturation for a significant amount of time, by definition, we are in a slope HGM class wetland. So we've got 3 separate examples from Nebraska, Utah, and Wyoming of typical headwater slope wetlands. And the one in the lower left-hand corner is actually from the Nebraska Sandhills, and this is a restoration of a degraded reach where an active channel has moved up into this system and dewatered this wet meadow in the background. And so this restoration was an attempt to raise the groundwater surface and restore the groundwater hydrology, which is a primary consideration for this slope wetland site. Looking at a landscape context, the watershed map we see here is from south central Kansas, and the illustration on the left is an illustration of the conditions we find in those very upstream headwater positions shown in yellow and orange. And this is a groundwater discharge site, and this is a classic slope wetland case. If we take a look at that reach shown in dark blue, we know that reach is riverine. It actually has a channel and an associated floodplain. And we need to start thinking in this context about boundaries between where that slope reach ends and that riverine reach begins. And we can speculate that that boundary should be somewhere in those red reaches where that slope dominated groundwater discharge water source becomes more dominated by stream hydrograph flood pulse considerations. Schematically, this is what a typical topographic slope wetland looks like. We've got water budget vectors shown here. G represents groundwater, R represents surface runoff, I and O subscripts are indicative of inflow and outflow. And so obviously we're going to get surface runoff short-term duration, but long-term groundwater discharge, if that groundwater source is strong enough and of a long enough duration to actually create spring flow, we have a classic case for a topographic slope wetland. And these landscape positions are ubiquitous throughout the country, and frankly, largely under-recognized. And typically, the degradation of these states can exist as a stable appearing channel when in fact they're signs of degradation and the loss of hydrologic function. Another project site from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. This shows selected soil map unit polygons as well as a stream order map of the watershed network. And if we focus in on the blue map unit polygons, those map units have a taxonomic classification of typic endo-aqualp, and we can also see that they're largely found only in the first and second order reaches. This particular map unit is a surface saturated map unit and is a candidate for, in this particular case, for targeting restoration for the eastern bog turtle, which is a species of reptile known to need at surface saturation and headwater position to survive. Shot here from Utah. Focus in on the one on the left. This is a headwater. This is not a wetland. This is not a slope wetland, but it is a headwater reach, and it's in intact state. It's dry at the surface. But we know it's got water within that landscape position, and we know that because when we take a look at the picture on the left, we've got groundwater discharge in the banks of that gully that's moving itself up through the system, and the vegetation there is reed canary grass, which is a primary colonizer of sites that have wet conditions. So basically, we've got a degraded state and an undegraded state, and the one in the degraded state on the left, in some cases, can be misinterpreted as a headwater riverine system when in fact it's a degraded upland headwater site. Just a kind of a test case, I want to point out that this particular project I'm going to show you was not one that NRCS did. So just to get that out front, because I'm going to show you something in the next slide that's going to be kind of interesting. But this is from the Great Lakes region. We've got a really, really large groundwater discharge wetland that corresponds to the slope HGM class. The soils are deep organic. The vegetation is tussock sedge. And we've frankly got a really nice, highly functioning landscape position here that fits neatly into that slope class. If these particular landscapes can be misinterpreted as riverine, they may lead the planner to the wrong conclusion that this is a riverine site, and in extreme cases lead a manager to decide to put a stream channel in this system. The result of this activity is going to result in a lowering of the groundwater table, an aeration of those organic soils, and ultimately subsidence to that entire landscape. So this is why making these distinctions when we're developing ecological site description concepts are vitally important. Map from Wayne County, Iowa, and the map unit polygons shown in yellow are the headwater reaches of the watershed network in this part of the country. The green and purple polygons are map units on 0 to 2% slopes, poorly drained, and they occur on the landscape position we refer to as interfluves. And all interfluve means is the highest point of the landscape on watershed divides. But we've got a potential connection between the rainfall catchment in those interfluve areas that we refer to as mineral flats, water stored in those mineral flat landscape positions, and then subsequently delivered through shallow subsurface flow into those headwater reaches. If we already know that those headwater reaches are endosaturated soils, which in this case they are, and we know that that means we've more than likely we're getting strong groundwater discharge, we've got a connection here between two ecological sites, between a recharge site high on the landscape on the interfluve and a discharge site in the extreme headwater immediately adjacent. Another example from Lucas County, Iowa, a little bit different mapping. We again see in light blue those interfluve sites. Those are again flat slopes, perching layer, poorly drained soils. And the map units in red and yellow are successive map units in the Katina that are both known groundwater discharge sites. So again, we've got a watershed context connection between headwater, catchment, storage, subsurface flow, and ultimate discharge into the adjacent landscape position. Slide I borrowed from my colleagues in the Soil Survey Division, and this is illustrating the concept of an integrated soil system. We can also use the term hydrosequence in this, and what we've illustrated here is taking individual map units together and blending them together in a landscape context through the movement of water from rainfall, recharge in a recharge zone, shallow subsurface flow from one map unit to the other, and a partition of that recharge into subsurface, shallow subsurface, and deep subsurface flow through those individual soil horizons. And this is basically what a hydrosequence or soil system is. So basically, we can look at a soil system as a landscape concept that incorporates hydrology and the full range of information we have on those individual soils and soil pedology and other attributes. So again, back to slope wetlands, we are concerned about them because of their unique function in our soil system. We can think of that slope wetland as an element in a soil sequence from the adjoining upland. And in all three of these cases, we can surmise that the uplands are a catchment discharge area. And these landscape positions are unique because they have the ability to take water from that upland catchment area, temporarily store it and detain it, and then release it to downstream reaches in the riverine class to maintain downstream base flow. And if that groundwater discharge is long enough for a duration, we can expect to see the formation and maintenance of organic soils, which provides a carbon sequestration function. Another shot on slope wetlands, and this is kind of an interesting case from sage-grouse country in western Wyoming. This is a large watershed, but there's not an active channel in this system, and the soil across that 300 or 400 yard wide area is histic epipedon, organic soil, hummocky, evidence of groundwater discharge feeding and maintaining this system. Mineral flats. We're moving to the extreme headwaters. As I mentioned earlier, that's where mineral flats are found on interfluves. The dominant water source in these is direct precipitation. Since we're on top of the landscape, we have no potential for surface runoff to feed these sites. And since they're very flat, we don't have any potential for an adjoining landscape to provide groundwater discharge. So the only water these sites get is direct precipitation. And if we're in a climatic area that provides a surplus precipitation over evapotranspiration for a significant period of time, weeks to months, then this will form a mineral flat wetland. But at any rate, this landscape position, even in arid climates, has got a function for recharge and delivery of water to an adjoining lower landscape. So the hydrodynamics are fairly simple in this site. They're all vertical. Precipitation and ET balance, and then the water in the soil profile is attempting to recharge a deeper underlying groundwater table. This is an extent map from northern Indiana with an aggregation of map units that correspond, again, to that 0 to 2% slope, poorly drained, and all of those map units with those attributes aggregated form the extent map we see within this MLRA boundary that you see in the light blue around the edge. And this is what this site looks like, and it's pretty close to reference condition outside of Indianapolis, Indiana. Nice flatwoods, flat landscape, some shallow ephemeral pockets in there, but not large enough to be any other wetland type. So this is what a mineral flat looks like as it exists in a flatwoods type subclass. Organic soil flats are very similar to mineral flats, except the surplus of precipitation over ET is strong enough to actually build up organic soil on the surface. These are rain-fed organic soils. Ambitrophic is a term associated with rain-fed, and we find these landforms in extensive lake beds. Pocosin wetlands in the Carolinas along the Atlantic coast correspond to organic soil flat. They're actually wetlands on the interfluve between streams. And also in south central Florida, there's also extensive organic soil flats down there again, but mainly rain-fed, dominant water sources rainfall in really wet climates. Fringe wetlands, starting with estuary and fringe, the dominant water source is basically ocean tides, the twice daily action of ocean tides. When we look at a typical web soil survey shot of soil mapping of an estuary and fringe wetland, this is from Chesapeake Bay area, and basically we have one single map unit describing that entire landscape. And it's interesting to take the time to discuss this in a little further detail. When we talk about estuary and fringe wetlands, salinity tends to be the driving force between the differences in plant community and the associated ecological functions, and we can talk about that salinity in terms of fresh, salt, and brackish. Other people use more of an elevation-based high marsh, middle marsh, low marsh, but in a case like this, we may actually have more than one rational ecological site within the same soil map unit. This is what a landscape, typical estuary and fringe landscape looks like, and a really good illustration of what a tidal inlet system looks like. Water moving in and out of estuary and fringe wetlands comes with a certain volume of water with that tidal flow, referred to as the tidal prism. And the amount of water let in and out of this landscape under the force of ocean tide is dictated by the geometry of tidal inlet channels. And so maintenance of these systems is highly dependent upon the abiotic channel geometry in those systems, and a lot of correlation between these systems and stream channel morphology. Lacustrine fringe are landscapes that are found along the shorelines of large lakes like the Great Lakes. Actually, to focus in on the picture on the right, this is a shot from the shore of Yellowstone Lake in Wyoming with the large lake in the background. Immediately adjacent to the shoreline of that lake is a landform with lodgepole pine growing on it, and just like the other picture from the riverine, that lodgepole pine indicates that that's not an especially wet site. But in the foreground, we have an interdunal wetland with water that's in direct connection with the lake level. So as that lake level rises and falls, we can expect that water in that interdunal wetland to rise and fall with it. And to the extent that we have good information on the lake gauge data, we can analyze the frequency and duration of water in that wetland. The lacustrine fringe wetland requires that this landscape actually be a landform derived from lake influences, and that nearshore dune is a function of the energy associated with wave action and periodic lake seiches, which are standing waves set up by wind energy. So there's a landform attribute associated with this, as well as a hydrology and hydrodynamic influence. And finally, if we're in a closed topographic depression and we are not part of any other landscape, then we're in a true depressional wetland, which again comes in many shapes and sizes depending on what part of the country we're in, from high plains playas to prairie potholes, Carolina bays in the southeast, and so on. The dominant water source of depressional wetlands can be surface runoff or groundwater or both. And so it's relevant to make distinctions in depressional wetlands, which we refer to as recharge or discharge. The definition of a recharge depression is a depression that is fed with surface runoff, and the ponded water attempts to recharge a deeper underlying groundwater table. And interestingly, these true depressions are usually associated with soils that have perching layers that are a function of that downward movement translocating clays. And so the landform and the hydrology work together to actually form the perching layer to further maintain the hydrology in these types of systems. A discharge wetland, on the other hand, is one where the dominant water source is groundwater discharge from either a shallow perched water table or the true local groundwater table. But the groundwater in this case is discharging into the wetland. And this is a slide I borrowed from Jimmy Richardson's hydrosoils book, and this is an illustration of the difference between recharge and discharge in a climatic context. So if we start at the cross-section in the top part of the slide, in a humid climate with a good groundwater catchment area, that groundwater is captured, moves through the soil. There's a surplus of water in the soil profile from which removed by vegetation, and we have surplus groundwater available to discharge into the adjacent to depressional wetland. Down at the bottom, in a semi-arid climatic regime, the groundwater catchment or the climate does not have enough surplus water to fill a soil profile, and so essentially all of the groundwater captured is used by the plant community in those adjoining uplands, and so the only water getting into these depressions is surface runoff. Once ponded, that surface runoff ponded in those depressions then is attempting to recharge the adjacent groundwater table. Again, we care about the depressional wetlands because of their unique functions. We already talked about the aquifer recharge potential in the recharged wetlands, often critical upland water sources, and also oftentimes the only seasonal aquatic organism habitat available in the landscape. Here we have a couple of web soil survey shots from two different parts of the country. The one in the upper left is from the Texas Panhandle. That's a hydric soil map and Randall clay map unit. Map is partially hydric. In this particular case, most of these large depressions do come with their own individual map unit, and this is a good example of a recharged wetland. The underlying groundwater table in this part of the country is tens or hundreds of feet below the adjacent surface. In the lower right-hand corner, we've got a depressional complex from the Prairie Pothole region, and the smaller map units as shown in the bottom and left-hand side of the shot represent recharge wetlands. The large map unit in the center of the shot is a discharge wetland, and we've more than likely got a case for recharge from those smaller wetlands actually feeding the discharge going into the larger one in a depressional wetland complex. And here's a generalized landscape map, schematic map, showing the relationships of HGM landscape classes in a typical watershed, with mineral flats on the inner fluves, mineral flats potentially discharging water through shallow subsurface flow into adjacent slope wetlands and low order reaches, and finally the transition from those slope wetlands with scale and stream energy into true riverine systems, and finally the outlet of large rivers into lake or ocean fringes. So again, ESD parameters are based on landscape position, dominant water source, and hydrodynamics. Those of us working with ecological site descriptions are familiar with the term influencing water features, and so I'd like to ask your consideration for these following questions. Do our description of influencing water features capture the connections between individual ecological sites? And can we actually take individual ecological site concepts and put them together in a watershed context to essentially build a watershed out of ecological sites in a hydrologic context? Can we incorporate soil hydrodynamic properties with the concepts of soil systems and hydrosequences into ESDs? And finally, do all sites have a hydrologic influence within their watershed? And I provided the answer, which is yes, this particular bullet. So if we can take hydrosequence and soil system concepts into ecological site descriptions, incorporating the limitations of spatial resolution of map units, using the MLRA site concept we already have available, we automatically bring in the climate-induced hydrologic functions. And using available methods, which Dwayne's going to show you later on, ideally build a site concept and a spatial basis for their testing in the field. And finally, once we have a spatial definition of the ecological site concept, we propose that we have an opportunity now to take those concepts in the field and start testing them with data collection on plant communities and other functions. And also just a plug for the wetland practitioners that are familiar with HGM principles in your local areas. They have knowledge that is of use, and ultimately they're a primary customer of our ESD product. And I think we're ready to finish up this portion of the webinar and turn it over to Dwayne.
All right, this first, we've got about 3 more modules to go through, PowerPoints. This first one's going to be discussing how we use soils data for this ESD and HGM extent mapping. So this is basically a culmination of some of the projects that Rich Weber has been working on over a couple of years in different states. We've just looked at how we can use the soils data and elevation data to try to do this kind of extent mapping for these wetland types. So the objectives here in this first one are to look at how to obtain the soils data that we can use for this analysis, and look at some of the simple query methods, and then how to prepare single value raster data sets for additional I don't see, looks like we've got some problem here with the what's going on.
What happened, Dwayne?
I don't know. Somehow the wrong presentation got placed there. Those are the objectives of this presentation. And the first part of this process is obtaining the soils data, and I'm pleased to make the announcement that a lot of this work has already been done for us. Steve Peasley and Sharon Waltman have done an enormous amount of work in preparing download tools, and this was all presented in a webinar back in October. With the availability of that webinar is on the YouTube website for the National Soil Survey Center, and the tools that are used are available on the NRCS GIS SharePoint site. But this really has improved the easy access to this soils data in the format that this kind of analysis can be done. So the product we make using these tools is a single file geodatabase for the area of extent that the project's going to consider. And this is where we can have multiple survey areas, as we see in this screenshot, covering a large area. And these data sets are created both can be created in both vector and raster format, and really enable us to be able to look at a large area with uniformity. Some of the other data sets that may be available that maybe need to be used for the geoprocessing can be acquired through the Geospatial Data Gateway. These may include, like Rich was mentioning, the MLRA boundaries, 12-digit HUC boundaries, some of the other data sets that could be used. And I would recommend that if you're not familiar with acquiring or working with GIS, to have a GIS specialist assistance in acquisition and acquiring these data sets and preparing them for your use. Some of the data that we will want to use in our analysis is basically stuff we would never use in any kind of geoprocessing function, and it's available in what we call web map services. And this, what I'm talking about here, is like the aerial photography, some of the the topographic maps, state and county boundaries, things that we probably wouldn't use for geoprocessing. And the process to acquire or access this data is to go into ARC catalog, and under the GIS servers option in the catalog tree, directory tree there, just click on add WMS server, and then the dialog box would come up, and you can type in this URL, and this will make this web service available to you in our catalog. And you can see in the screen capture in the lower left corner how there's a number of data sets available there for use that are all being provided to everyone in the USDA, on the USDA backbone. And I want to mention that the notes format for these PowerPoints have a lot of step-by-step instructions that we've prepared for the participants to use. And again, if there's any questions or assistance needed, please contact us for additional help. So once the data set is obtained from using the Sergo download tools that Steve Peasley developed, these data sets are ready to use. And the scripts automatically create the table relates that enable some simple query processing to take place. In this example, we can see the query for a simple query for a eco class ID can be carried out on the soils data. And the procedure is to have the eco class table added to the ArcMap document, and the table can be opened up in the table format, and a select by attributes function performed to, we're just looking for this example of the RX075XYO13KS Loamy Lowland ESD extent in this area. So the relate can be activated using the relate button that will select all the rows out of the component table that have this ESD in that component's definition. And then the component table can be related to the map unit table, and then the map unit table can be related to the map unit polygons, and the selected polygons would display in the map. So we can see the extent of a single ESD description throughout the data set that's been selected. The optimum solution or the process to do more advanced queries would be to have a soil scientist prepare a script that's going to search down into all the different tables of soil properties, and then have those the script produce an output report that would have a proper relationship that we could join this data to our map unit polygons, and be able to have a really good query built for the different kinds of soil properties that would either be needed for a HDM, a wetland class, or a abiotic properties of an ecological site. And this is where we would have to have the assistance of the soil scientists to build this script and then run the report in, to produce this table that can be used. For other analysis of just simple queries also can be made if needed. for just some simple values that are available in the attribute tables related to the soils data that can be joined or related to, in this case, we're looking at the flood frequency, or the frequently flooded and occasionally flooded, and then the water polygons out of our soil map units that would have been seen to give a good representation of the riverine wetland type. And so simple queries like this can be made by people that are not GIS users or soil scientists, but can be shown, again, through use of step-by-step instructions or getting a little experience working with these tables to build these simple kind of queries. Also, the raster data format can be used in the same way. Working with raster data may be new to some people, as most of our experience has been with the vector format. But the data that's available in our raster format can be joined to some of the tables that we have available, like the EMU Ag table or the map unit table. And these joined data can then be clipped. The raster can then be clipped to a mask that could be either a HUC boundary, an MLRA boundary, or a common resource area, whatever extent is being evaluated. And this can be used for acreage area calculations. One way of easily analyzing the soil raster data is building, instead of building queries straight out, just looking at the symbology properties that are available for the different attribute values that are available in the tables that have been joined to the data. In this case, we're looking at a custom-built table where the report generated a landform attribute where all the different landform geomorphic positions were collected into one attribute value. And then this selection can be made and symbolized and critiqued as to completeness before a formal or an extraction can be made on the data. And I also want to cover the use of the identify button in analyzing the results of this symbology process. So when we start singling out the areas that look like they have the properties we want to separate for the different wetland types, the original vector data can be used with the identify button to examine questionable areas, areas that may be included or excluded from our categorization of the symbology. And then we can use the identify button functionality to kind of bore down through the tables that are related and then look at the attribute values that are of interest, such in this case the geomorphic position. Now once we've pretty satisfied with the values that we have selected to separate out these different types, the extract by attributes tool can be used to build an expression that will pull out those cell values in the raster that we can use to represent these different HDM types or, again, the abiotic properties of the ecological sites. Just wanted to show one example here of how different soil survey areas may be of more use for this purpose than others. There's a difference in some places in the map resolution of cutting out the different terrain features or geomorphic positions. And this is just an example that we see where we have 3 survey areas together. 2 of them have a pretty detailed resolution in separating the different landforms, and another adjacent to it is has a lower resolution or more associations and complexes in the map unit design. which may not be as useful for this kind of analysis. But just to make people aware that they're going to see this kind of phenomenon occur. Another thing we've run into is where we have soil attribute differences. In this case, we have 3 survey areas that the resolution of the map units look consistent, but in one case, there's some differences in the attribute values that would have to be examined and looked at as to what's going on and how to make this more consistent across this area. And again, this is where we want to emphasize in all this analysis, it's good to have a local resource soil scientist involved in the process and involved in the work to be able to answer questions and provide the information that's needed. So that's what we're going to cover for the soils portion. Again, we are not able to do anything with the presentations, Sean. If you can bring up the 3rd module. Don't know what happened there. This module is where we're going to look at the use of the elevation data for this kind of analysis and for ESD and HEM extent mapping. And we'll look at the source of the data is the National Digital Elevation Data Web Services, how to access it, and then look at some of the simple terrain and hydrology data sets that we can use for this work. The National Elevation Data Web Service is probably one of the best sources of acquiring the data used for this analysis. It is a web service that's being hosted at the National Center for Geospatial Excellence in Fort Worth. And the connection, again, can be made in our catalog where you add this GIS server, you input this URL, and you can go through and you have access to the USGS National Elevation Data Set. We have access to holdings of different elevation data formats that NRCS has obtained. We don't have all the data NRCS has, but there's quite a bit of it that has been loaded into this, and they're continually working on getting more data available. So when the data is in ArcMap, in your ArcMap session, you can actually clip out the portion of the data that's needed for the analysis. Again, this is a place where it would be good to employ the assistance of a GIS specialist to provide this data for the project. The clip process is pretty simple. You set the analysis environment setting to an envelope area of the MLRA or the 12-digit HUC that you're working with, and the next step would be to run a simple geoprocessing function. In this case, we're showing an addition of the value of a 0 to all the elevation values. Once that geoprocessing function is run with that analysis environment extent set, the clip data would then display on your map and be available for your processing. Most of this data that's available on these web services are going to be provided in a coordinate system that is geographic and in decimal degrees, and that would need to be projected to a projected coordinate system for use in some of the geoprocessing functions that we're going to want to run. So again, it's good to have a GIS specialist involved in providing this data for this kind of part of the project. Terrain data derivatives of the elevation surface are very useful in doing analysis. One product that is always desired is a hillshade image that gives us the backdrop or the kind of a representation of the terrain that we're looking at. Slope gradient is another product that can be produced and used for analysis. Others are like aspect and solar radiation, or analytical hillshades, another term for that. But these are just some of the primary derivatives. Some of the secondary derivatives, like a wetness index, can also be created and used. We're not going to talk about some of the more advanced processing capability that is available in packages like ArcSIE, Soils Inference Engine, or TALDM. But for the advanced users, there are terrain derivatives that can be created there that are very useful as well. Just to cover the simplification, if you start looking at some of these data sets, just some simple layer property manipulation can really enhance the display and the contrast quality of the view the user sees. And just to make everyone aware that it's real simple to open up the properties and make some of these adjustments that will enhance the view and the display of this. And again, these step-by-step instructions are provided in the notes format for this presentation. Of particular interest for the HGM extent mapping, as we have seen in Rich's presentation, is the slope shape derivatives that can be produced, and gives us an idea of what parts of the terrain is water collecting, is water dispersing. Those are the planar curvature products, as you see in this example in the lower right. So we can see the concave areas that are parallel to the contours. The profile curvature product actually shows us where water would be accelerating in the landscape or decelerating in the landscape based on the slope shape. But this is one product that's very useful in this analysis, and we will be looking at how this is used in Module 4. Also, the hydrology derivatives can be derived from the elevation surface. This is just a picture of the workflow process to create the stream order hydrology derivative, which is very useful also in what the hydrologists use as creating these stream metrics or parameters for looking at the HDM classification. So to go through these, just to introduce people to what these functions do in creating the hydrology, the fill function is necessary for preparing the elevation surface for hydrology analysis. It basically fills up the sinks in the surface so water will flow continually across the surface. And there is the ability in this process to put in the true sink locations so they would be identified in the surface. And then the flow direction is a raster product that is created that's rarely ever used for display or viewing in a map, but it's a primary product that's needed for additional hydrology analysis products to be created. And it's in this case the software produces what's called a D8 flow direction, where it's going to have just one direction out of each cell location for flow to occur. There are other processes that can create what's called a D-infinity or multi-directional flow that also can be used for analysis. But the flow direction is important. Again, you rarely ever look at it, but it's important for the creation of other products. The flow accumulation raster is a product that's going to be created to give us the value in the cells of all the cells that flow into that cell. So it's an accumulative cell value that can be used for a number of things to derive a stream network. This is where we're going to get the numbers to do that. It can also be used for runoff volume. It's basically treating the surface as if it's got a 100% runoff occurring. There is the capability of incorporating a raster into the process that would weight the surface, as in soil infiltration or intake rate, that could be used for runoff volume calculations at different conditions of antecedent moisture. And the stream network function is actually what we call a conditional function, where the software is asking the question, is this expression, mathematical expression, true? If this expression is true, this will be the result in the output raster. And if it's not true, another result will occur in the output raster. So the set null function is one where we can introduce a threshold value of catchment area. So all of the cells that meet this threshold value would be converted to a null or no data cell value, and or set to null, as the name implies. And then the values of the cells that exceed that threshold value would be retained based on the value that you put in the expression. This is a very powerful tool to help us build a single raster data set that shows where concentrated flow will occur. And then the stream order function is a hydrologic tool that allows the values to be assigned to the cells that indicate how many stream junctions occur above that cell. And there are two classification systems available in this software tool. One, the default value, is the one that's preferred by the hydrologist. It's called the Strahler stream order, and it will create this output product that you see here, where we have two first-order streams coming together, and at that junction, a second-order stream starts. And again, we're going to use the stream order along with some of the, we'll show how we can use the stream order along with some of the other terrain derivatives later on in our analysis with the soils data. So in our work that we've done on some of these projects, we've created a couple of workflow processes to produce an output table that has some of the stream morphology parameters. And these parameters would be the slope of a stream segment, a particular stream order designation, and then also the catchment area above that stream order. And we've built these workflow processes into two models. We tried to link them together into one, but now we just have these. We had to separate them to get them to work properly. But these models are available for anyone that wants to use them. But we'll look at how this works in the process. So we can extract stream segments. In this case, we're seeing the slope of the order 2 streams characterized or symbolized here. So with those tools, we produce these tables that will have the value where the slope can be calculated for the actual stream segments, and then the catchment area above that can be available for query and analysis. And again, this is some of the stream parameter segments are parameters that the hydrologists have told us are very important for this kind of analysis. So again, just like we were looking at the vector data, we had the identify tool. Just want to introduce users to this pixel inspector tool. This is a tool that can be used to actually see the cell values within a raster. It gives us the capability to, in this case, we're looking at a profile of the elevation values, and at the same time, we're looking at this profile that is showing us the elevation values in a linear profile across the landscape. And we can look at the values of another raster along that profile. In this case, we're looking at some profile curvature numbers to see what the values are in that raster. And this is good for being able to select thresholds and identify pieces of the terrain that we want to actually use specific numbers to plug into our analysis. But the pixel inspector tool is basically easy to use. It's just it has to be added to the ArcMap toolbars from the customized. It's available in the customized folders. And this is one slide we always like to show when we're talking about using elevation data from the USGS National Elevation Data Set. These data sets are now being derived from different sources. And as the LIDAR data is becoming available, it is being used to replace the data that's created from hypsography or contour lines. That is not, of course, that's not available everywhere. And we need to be aware of some of the artifacts that are created by hypsography data that's been used to create these surfaces. And this is a slide that, part of this slide at least, came from some materials provided by Dr. Fred Young. And it's very important that the user realize in some cases the hypsography data creates artifacts that USGS has tried to smooth out through generalization, and in some cases it's still going to have an impact on the data that we're using. And another thing about hypsography data, generated DEM data, is the contour interval, as we see in this upper left corner, in this wide area where there's no contour lines, the contour interval is coarse enough that it's not capturing any relief features or characterizing the surface there. It may be a nice, smooth, flat surface, or it may be very hummocky and full of minor or micro relief features that we're just not going to be able to see or capture in the elevation surface because of the nature of the contour line placement and interval. It's just to be good to be aware of these kind of artifacts when you're working with elevation data. Okay, Sean, if you could bring up that fourth module. This is the final module we're going to look at today, and it's basically how some concepts of geospatial analysis and how to perform some simple geoprocessing techniques on both soils and elevation derivatives combined. And just to go over some geospatial analysis concepts that we're talking about, we're trying to model a phenomenon that occurs in the real world, and we're using geospatial data to do that. It's really a simplification. There's going to be places where it's not working very well. We need to be aware of all these limitations and in regards to using it in a decision-making process. For the first two modules we've looked at, we're looking at representation models that we're trying to use to map the extent of this. And in this module, we're going to evaluate looking at combining these together in some simple geoprocessing functions. in our first part of our process, we need to look at is our extent uniform in the answers we're going to provide, or do they need to be? Is it better to subdivide this area of extent that we're looking at into some kind of subcategories? And are the functional assessment parameters for these wetlands that we're looking at going to be the same? Or the wetland function is going to be the same across this whole extent? This is an example of where in this MLRA we see that the terrain has quite a difference or quite a distinct difference in part of the MLRA as opposed to the other parts, and it's also reflected in some of the soil properties as well. Does this need to be considered as a whole, or does this need to be subdivided in our analysis? Again, we want to try to build the analysis in stages, looking at the different, how to approach the problem, not take it in one big chunk, but actually subdivide it and provide answers at different levels. Again, we're just looking at soils and elevation here. There may be some other data sets that could be used in other ways to also address these extent of these properties that we're looking at. And again, this needs to be a team effort where subject matter experts are brought together that know the GIS software, that are experts in the phenomenon that's being evaluated or queried or analyzed. And then what is the availability of suitable geospatial data for these kind of processes? Again, some of the data we have may be useful for one part or one component of our analysis, and then when we try to do the next phase or the next step, we may find that it's not suitable or it's going to need to be performed in a different way. This example shows how, for this area, it looks like the riverine HDM class is pretty well defined and consistent across the area, but when we run a query to produce a head slope wetland, we see we're starting to see a lot of differences in survey area results here. And so for riverine, this may be acceptable, a usable product, and then we're going to have to find out some other way to try to address some of the other HDM classes. And again, here's an example of what we were speaking about earlier, some of the artifacts that are present in our NEDS data, elevation data that are a result of contour line bias. And in this case, we're looking at the profile curvature, and when the subject matter experts that know this terrain look at this data, they can tell us this is not the way the terrain should look in a profile curvature product. We're just seeing too much of the artifacts here that are erroneous or going to give us an erroneous answer when we use this in analysis. And it was the same with the slope gradient for this data set as well in this portion of the study area. So when this occurs, we need to try to avoid the reasoning that we have, well, this is the best data available, so we go ahead and use it. We need to try to avoid that and recognize that sometimes the results are going to outweigh any benefits that we're going to get, and we need to just make the decision that in some cases this data is not suitable, and we just simply don't need to use it in any way in our analysis. But once suitable data has been found, integrating the soils and elevation derivatives that can be used is really advantageous for being able to expand our understanding, our knowledge. In this case is a prime example of where we have knowledge. In this case, we have actually published scientific studies of the occurrence of soil properties that can be directly related to landform position, and these landform positions can be identified, quantified, and studied using our elevation derivatives, in this case derived from LIDAR data, where this riser and tread sequence can be identified within an individual map unit, and those areas can be measured, and even though the occurrence of the different soil properties may be of a minor composition, these areas are extremely important for the ecological and other interpretive uses for this landform and in this area. So this is a good example of where we're merging our soils and our elevation derivatives together to increase our ability to identify the soil properties that are important for land use decisions. Another way elevation data can be used in association with our soils data, simply just to visualize or to examine the landscape position. In this case, we're making a profile of the elevation values using the 3D Analyst profile tool, and in concurrence with what we have produced as a query for mineral flats and slope wetlands and riverine wetlands. And here we have good agreement with the concept of what our mineral flat position would be in the landscape. That is a good agreement between the elevation surface that we're analyzing. So this is just a way to test and check that position. And then we can see areas where, and with the same query on the same data set, we may have areas that we don't have good agreement in a different survey area. And this might be something we want to evaluate our query for, or go into that survey area and study it, or make people aware that in this case the interfluvial and uplands appears to be actually in drainage ways on the uplands. So this is a way to improve our data and then test the results we have by comparing the elevation data with the soils data. For more advanced analysis, where we can combine both the soil and the terrain derivatives, we can use the set null function again in a way of doing a conditional analysis, where we set a threshold value that will separate the concave areas in the planar slope raster, shape raster. And this threshold value would be used to set all the other values to null. So the only areas that are retained are the concave portions of the terrain. And where that threshold value is not met, where we would have a really good concave shape, we want to populate with the expression the map unit key from the G-Sergo values from our raster data of our soils data. So that would result in a raster output that shows all the concave areas in the terrain that have the map unit key cell values in those locations. This output raster can then be joined to the map aggregate table. We can then convert that raster into a polygon feature class, and then take those polygons and remove those areas that are really small. We'd have a threshold value for size of area, and then create a feature class that would have only those areas that are concave and that have a wet soil component in them. Just to see what this looks like, The result would be all of the concave shaped areas in the terrain that have a wet soil component in that location. And then we can remove those areas that intersect our riverine classified areas already. And this is what we're looking at being a first start at looking for our head slope wetland locations. And then we can combine that with an analysis based upon our stream morphology criteria. In this case, they wanted to look at the second order streams that have a catchment area of greater than 20 acres and select out or extract out those features that had that concave shape that meet these stream morphology parameter criteria. And this would give us an even finer picture of the possibility of where these head slope wetlands might occur for our field validation. So the next step, again, would be to take these results, look at those locations in the field, examine the threshold values that were used to categorize the continuous data. Just some photographs here of different conditions. The photograph on the left shows a riverine area that has a high stream order and a large catchment area of over 100 square mile in that particular case, as compared to the photograph on the right that is a low stream order with a small catchment area. And the question is this still in a riverine or is it a slope wetland? And is that a man-made channel that has been created through past manipulation? What do the soil properties tell us here? So these kind of field validations can be used to provide the location of the metrics that can be used for further analysis. So once we have a large number of georeferenced field observations, there is a tool available in the Spatial Analyst Toolbox called the sample function that allows a user to input these point locations, and they will provide an output table for many different raster layers where those points actually occur and intersect those cell values. And this can give us a table to be used for statistical analysis and, for these threshold values that we're looking at, such as those stream metric properties and then the curvature values and as other associated properties as well. This is really a brief introduction to a really extensive subject matter, and there are other tools available. I want to mention the TOD-M that's available in ArcSIE that have even more advanced terrain analysis capability, and some of the other analysis types that we haven't mentioned as well. But that's basically what we've come up with to this point to introduce people to, and I'll turn this back over to Rich to allow him to fill in any additional comments he has, and then we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Dwayne. As Dwayne said, he threw a lot of stuff out there, a lot of highly complex things, but perhaps it's time to step back and take a deep breath and just talk about what we're after when we're developing spatial site concepts. The bottom line is if we have a combination of parameters that we can apply to put boundaries on individual sites with the same function, same reference plant community, then we have a robust site concept, and the complexity of tools increases as the resolution of our site concept requirements increase as well. But I guess to make a long story short, it's not necessarily always as complicated as it looks. And in a lot of cases, soil map unit polygons alone are very good data sources to use on their own for developing site concepts. One thing about the watershed network, that basically, ideally, if we go through all of those steps that Dwayne just described, and we have an entire watershed within a reference domain such as a major land resource area analyzed, and we have that entire system with every reach categorized in terms of drainage area and slope for valley, we probably have a good first cut at a way to stratify ecological sites by itself. And those are relatively simple techniques to do. So with that, Sean, I guess I'd turn it back to you, and I think Stacy's online as well to kind of field questions if we have any.
Well, we do have some questions. I want to thank you both for those presentations, and I'll just remind people that the way you put a question in is put it in the Q&A window at the bottom of the Adobe Connect frame, and then we'll bring those up. There's one question here I know I'm happy to take, is where will the slides that are being presented available? Where will those be? And I'll post those along with the webinar recording so that you can access those, and as with any webinar that we do here, you can do a search for videos and webinars on the National Soil Survey Center webpage, and you'll go to that videos and webinars page, and then they're arranged generally by branch. And of course, you can get the link to the YouTube recording there, or you can go onto YouTube, do a general search for this topic, and it'll come right up for you. So I took one of the questions, and go ahead, and hopefully that gives you some time to put in your questions, those of you that are online. One question that we have submitted already is, sizing can be an issue. What is the smallest acreage to tie ESDs, HGM, etc.? Goes to splitting versus lumping.
I'll go ahead and take that, and the short answer is there is no answer. I will just make the statement again that we have to remember the spatial resolution of the data we're working with. And the first consideration ultimately is the resolution of our soil map unit polygons. And another consideration I have is if we have a site that is small enough that we can't effectively draw a map of an extent map of that site at a 1 to 12,000 scale, we may have something we really can't make use of in conservation planning.
All right, now's the time to put your questions in if you got questions. Stacy, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't have anything to add at this point. I would just recommend for people who are interested in trying this out or learning more about using a spatial approach to develop their site concepts, specifically with respect to wetlands, that, you know, it would be, like it's been mentioned before a few times, this is a partnership. So, you know, we do have to work with our soil scientists and with our GIS specialists. Nobody is going to be expected to do this on their own. So I know it does seem quite overwhelming, but Dwayne and Rich have been working together for a long time, and they've been working with ecological site people and soil scientists and vegetation specialists all over the country. So just remember that this is a partnership, and, you know, don't be afraid to reach out and create that network and that technical team for yourself. Nobody's expected to do this all on their own. So just want to add that.
All right, we got a couple more questions. Is the goal for this as a first cut screening tool?
I'll go ahead and take that unless Stacy might jump in. The answer that I have is yes. And in fact, I think those of us at the core team that have been having recent discussions, we all have come to the conclusion that it's probably best to start out with spatial site concept in hand first before we continue to do real highly intensive data collection. And that allows you to do several things. And probably the most important thing is to actually immediately start correlating what you're seeing on the ground with a site concept that you already have, so you can start comparing apples and apples. And then use that field data to come back and modify your site concept map boundaries.
Okay, the next question, is there a custom toolbox available for geoprocessing the NED, National Elevation Data?
We've just been using the straight out of the box spatial analyst tools. We haven't prepared a toolbox per se. Again, there's other packages available that do these kind of things, like SIE, Soil Inference Engine has some terrain derivative production capability, and the TAWDM is another package, and then some people like to use the Saga software, but the only thing that we've created for this that's particularly specific bit were those models to create those hydrology parameters.
Okay, next question. Would the potential wetland soil landscapes, PWSL attribute, be useful in this process, provided with the GCircle value-added lookup table database? And I think the PWSL tells something about the percentage a circle map unit that might possibly contain a wetland segment.
Yeah, that's a good point. And honestly, I'm not personally familiar with actually what goes into that attribute. I will say that I would take that PWSL map as a broad first cut to generally separate what I consider potential HGM class landscapes from adjacent uplands. And that's probably about as far as you can take that, because it's not going to give you any real good soil hydrodynamic information. It's not going to give you any information on dominant water source or hydrodynamics, but it is going to give you a good indication of where your, I'm just going to say, wetland hotspots are versus where they won't be. So not bad information, but not especially useful for really homing in on getting a good class or subsection together.
And I would like to address the value-added table. Yes, I think when that table's produced for the newly released Circle data that was made available in October, I think it would be some of those attributes would be very useful.
Okay. Next question. What terrain analysis techniques would be effective in characterizing the differences between ombrotrophic and minerotrophic peatlands?
That's a good one. Basically, your ombrotrophic soil landscapes are going to be, they're going to have the same terrain derivatives as mineral flats. So basically, again, if you've got a slope range of 0 to 2%, and if you're fortunate enough to have like a geomorphic description that says something like interfluve, then you've got a potential for either one. So anyway, and that's about as far as you can take the landscape derivatives, because they're both rain-fed, they're both on top of the world, they're both flatter than a pancake, they both got a poorly drained drainage interpretation. And after that, the other thing about, then if you've got a histosol on that landscape, I'd say you're there. That's pretty much it. I can't think of any other attributes, and that's almost, I like that question because that's almost a slam dunk.
Anyone have any other questions? Well, hearing none, any closing comments from our presenters?
Sean, this is Stacy. I guess I just want to give a big thanks to Rich and Dwayne for all the work they did in putting this together. I think it was highly informative, and I really hope that this gives people some food for thought about how to approach quicker ways to look at cutting out your broad ecological site groups, or maybe even your ecological sites themselves on an MLRA basis, as we're all being mandated to do this year. So I guess one thing I would just say in closing is that I believe that this this approach and the complementariness with the hydrogeomorphic classes and this type of approach is easily standardized from region to region. And I do believe this may be one way to ensure that while our ecological site concepts are being developed within the context of MLRAs and are unique within MLRAs, that we have some sort of standardized process for how they're being developed among MLRAs. And I know this has been a really big question from our partners and from some people even inside the agency is from a quality assurance perspective, how are we ensuring that there is some sort of standardization in our site concepts from MLRA to MLRA? And so I do believe on our national team and on our national riparian team, if we can all come together and agree that these types of approaches are valid and are useful no matter where you are in the country, that would be one way to help standardize this process. So I'm just going to leave it at that too.
All right. Rich, Dwayne?
I think we're good.
All right, and just to remind everybody, these will be posted to YouTube. The recording for the webinar and the slides will also be available on our videos and webinars page at the National Soil Survey Center. And with that, that concludes our webinar.